They called her the Ghost of Thorn Manor. For 3 years, Crystal was the invisible wife of Julian Thorn, New York's most ruthless billionaire. He treated her like a mistake, hiding her away while he paraded his perfect assistant in front of the cameras. But Julian made a fatal calculation. He didn't know who Crystal really was before she put on that wedding ring. Tonight, at the erratic Met Gala of the decade, the invisible wife is about to step into the light. And when she does, Julian won't just regret ignoring her. He'll be begging for her mercy. You are not ready for this twist. The silence in the penthouse was suffocating. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a vacuum where all warmth had been sucked out. Crystal Vance, legally Crystal Thorn, sat at the edge of the sprawling king-sized bed, her fingers tracing the cold silk of the duvet. The digital clock on the bedside table read 2:42 a.m. He wasn't coming home. Again. To the outside world, Julian Thorn was the titan of tech, the man who had revolutionized renewable energy infrastructure with Thorn Dynamics. He was the face on the cover of Forbes, the man every woman in Manhattan wanted, and every man wanted to be. But to Crystal, he was just a ghost who occasionally stopped by to change suits. She stood up, walking toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Her reflection in the glass looked tired. At 26, she should have been vibrant. Instead, she wore beige cardigans and tied her hair back in a severe, sensible bun, just the way Julian liked it. "Don't draw attention to yourself, Elle," he had told her on their wedding day. It wasn't a request, it was an order. "My life is complicated enough. I need peace at home, not a spectacle." So she became peace. She became nothing. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from Julian, heading straight to the office. "Have the housekeeper send a fresh suit. The Sterling Gala is tonight. Be ready by 7:15 p.m. Wear the grey dress." Crystal stared at the screen. No. "Good morning." No. "Sorry I missed dinner." Just orders. The Sterling Gala. It was the event of the season, hosted by Marcus Sterling, the elusive British investor whose approval Julian desperately needed for his new venture, Project Aurora. If Julian secured Sterling's backing, he would become a trillionaire. If he failed, Thorn Dynamics might collapse under its own debt. "The grey dress," she whispered, a bitter smile touching her lips. It was a shapeless, dull thing he had bought her 2 years ago. It made her look like a governess, easily blending into the wallpaper. That was the point. Julian wanted a prop, not a partner. She walked into her walk-in closet, pushing past the rows of beige and grey Julian insisted she wear. Her hand landed on a hidden panel at the back of the closet. She pressed it, and a small false wall clicked open. Inside, the lighting was different, warmer. Hanging there was a collection of sketches, fabric swatches, and a single breathtaking garment protected by a garment bag. It was a dress of midnight blue velvet and silver threading, designed with a structural complexity that defied gravity. It was a masterpiece. It was hers. Not Crystal the housewife. But Evie Julian didn't know. The world didn't know. The mysterious designer E.V., who had been anonymously consulting for the biggest fashion houses in Paris and Milan for the last 5 years. That was Crystal. She had kept her identity secret to avoid embarrassing Julian, to keep the peace he cherished so much. She touched the velvet. 3 years, Julian, she whispered to the empty room. I gave you 3 years of silence. I gave you my light so you could shine. She thought about the text message again. Wear the grey dress. For the first time in their marriage, a spark of rebellion ignited in her chest. It wasn't a flicker. It was a wildfire. Tonight wasn't just a party. Marcus Sterling was known for appreciating bold visionaries. If Julian wanted to secure the deal of a lifetime, he needed a wife who matched his power, not a mouse who hid in his shadow. But more than that, Crystal was tired of being invisible. She pulled the midnight blue dress out of the hidden compartment. "Not tonight, Julian," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Tonight, the grey dress stays in the closet." The limousine idled outside the penthouse building at 6:55 p.m. sharp. Julian Thorne sat in the back seat, tapping furiously on his tablet. He was a strikingly handsome man, with a jawline that could cut glass and eyes the colour of ice. But his face was marred by a permanent scowl of stress. "Where is she?" he snapped, not looking up. Sophia Laurent, his vice president of public relations, sat across from him. She was stunning in a crimson-red gown that hugged every curve, her blonde hair cascading in perfect waves. She looked more like his wife than Crystal ever did. "I'm sure she's coming, Julian," Sophia purred, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. "You know how Crystal is. She probably struggled to find shoes that match that quaint grey dress." Julian sighed, finally locking the tablet. "I don't have time for this. Sterling is going to be there at 7:30. I need to catch him before the dinner service starts." "You should have just taken me as your +1, Sophia said, leaning forward, her hand brushing his knee. "I know the Sterling portfolio inside out. Crystal doesn't even know who Marcus Sterling is." "She's my wife, Sophia. It's about optics. The family man image plays well with the British investors." Julian checked his watch again. 6:58 p.m. The door to the building opened. Julian glanced out the window, expecting to see the drab grey figure of his wife scuttling toward the car. He froze. The doorman was holding the door open for a woman, but for a split second, Julian didn't recognize her. She was wearing midnight blue. The dress was architectural, with a high neck that plunged into a daring V-back, the fabric shimmering like a starless night sky. It was cinched at the waist with a belt of crushed diamonds. Her hair, usually trapped in a bun, was loose, falling in dark, glossy waves around her shoulders. Her makeup was sharp, a bold red lip and winged eyeliner that made her brown eyes look dangerous. It was Crystal. Sophia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What on earth is she wearing?" Julian's jaw tightened. He rolled down the window as Crystal approached the car. She moved with a grace he hadn't seen in years, her head held high. The paparazzi stationed outside the building, usually uninterested in the boring Mrs. Thorne, suddenly began snapping photos frantically. Flash, flash, flash. Crystal slid into the car, bringing with her a scent of jasmine and oud, not the baby powder scent she usually wore. "You're late," Julian said, his voice cold. He didn't compliment her. He didn't look at her with desire. He looked at her with annoyance. "And what is that? I told you the grey dress." Crystal smoothed the velvet over her lap, meeting his gaze evenly. The grey dress had a stain. This was the only alternative. "A stain?" Sophia scoffed, eyeing the expensive fabric of Crystal's gown with jealous scrutiny. "That looks like a bespoke piece, Crystal. Did you blow the monthly household budget on a rental?" "It's not a rental," Crystal said softly. "It's too much," Julian snapped, signaling the driver to move. "You look like you're trying to compete with the disco ball. Sterling is a traditionalist. He likes modesty." "Modesty doesn't mean invisibility, Julian," Crystal replied. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but she kept her face impassive. "Don't lecture me on business," Julian shot back, returning to his tablet. "Just stay in the background tonight. Don't speak unless spoken to. And for God's sake, don't try to discuss the market. Stick to the charity work or the weather." Sophia smirked. Don't worry, Julian. I'll handle the heavy lifting with Mr. Sterling. Crystal can sit with the wives. Crystal turned her head to look out the window as the New York skyline blurred past. The old Crystal would have apologized. The old Crystal would have shrunk into the leather seat and held back tears. But the woman looking at the reflection in the window wasn't crying. She was calculating. He thinks I'm a liability, she thought. He thinks Sophia is his asset. He has no idea that Marcus Sterling has been trying to recruit EV for 6 months. The car pulled up to the curb of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The red carpet was a river of blood and diamonds. Remember, Julian hissed as the door opened. Silent, invisible. Crystal stepped out of the car. The roar of the crowd was deafening. Julian! Julian over here! Mr. Thorne, a comment on the merger. But then the shouts shifted. Who is that? Is that the wife? Look at the dress. Who are you wearing? Julian stepped out, offering his arm to Crystal, not out of affection, but out of obligation. He plastered a fake smile on his face. Sophia trailed behind them, carrying Julian's briefcase like a shield, trying to angle herself into the photos. They reached the top of the stairs where the press line was thickest. A reporter from Vogue leaned over the velvet rope, thrusting a microphone toward them. Mrs. Thorne, that gown is exquisite. It looks like... Is it an EV original? We haven't seen a new design from the house of EV in a year. Julian froze. He looked at the reporter, then down at Crystal. EV? Julian laughed nervously. No, my wife buys off the rack. It's likely a knockoff. The reporter looked offended. Mr. Thorne, I know an EV structure when I see one. The stitching is unmistakable. Crystal looked at the camera. She didn't smile. She just tilted her head. It's an original, Crystal said, her voice clear and bell-like over the noise. Julian squeezed her arm, hard. Crystal, he warned through his teeth. Stop lying. I never lie, Julian, she whispered back, pulling her arm free from his grip. She turned and walked into the great hall alone, leaving Julian and Sophia staring open-mouthed at her back. The invisible wife had just made her entrance, and the night had only just begun. The great hall of the museum was transformed into a kaleidoscope of wealth and power. Waiters in white tuxedos navigated through a sea of celebrities, tech moguls and old money socialites. The air buzzed with the hum of deals being struck and reputations being destroyed. Julian caught up to Crystal near the Temple of Dender exhibit. He grabbed her elbow, his fingers digging into her skin, pulling her into the shadow of an ancient sandstone column. What do you think you're doing? Julian hissed, his voice low and dangerous. Walking off like that? Making up stories about designer dresses? You are testing my patience, Crystal. Crystal looked down at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. I didn't make anything up, Julian. You were the one who panicked. Because you're making a scene. Julian ran a hand through his hair, looking around nervously to ensure no investors were watching. Sophia is smoothing things over with the press right now, telling them you're confused. Now listen to me. I see Marcus Sterling over by the Champagne Tower. I'm going to go talk to him. You will stay here. You will not speak to anyone. You will grab a sparkling water, hold it, and look pleasant. Do you understand? I'm not a child, Julian, Crystal said, her voice steady. Then stop acting like one, he spat. He straightened his tie, checked his reflection in a glass display case, and strode away, seamlessly transitioning from an angry husband to the charming CEO of Thorne Dynamics. Crystal watched him go. She saw Sophia intercept him, handing him a glass of scotch, whispering something in his ear that made him smirk. They looked like the power couple. They looked like they belonged. For a moment, Crystal felt the old urge to flee, to run back to the penthouse, strip off the dress, and hide under the covers. But then she caught her reflection in the glass of the exhibit. She didn't see the sad, grey housewife. She saw Evie, the woman who commanded respect from the head of Chanel. The woman whose sketches were framed in studios in Milan. No, she told herself. Tonight I play my own game. She didn't stay in the shadows. She walked toward the bar, the midnight blue velvet swirling around her legs like liquid smoke. Heads turned. Whispers followed her. Is that Julian Thorne's wife? I thought she was homelier. That dress is incredible. She ordered a glass of champagne, not sparkling water, and turned to face the room. That's when she saw him. Marcus Sterling. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with silver hair and a posture that screamed aristocracy. He wasn't surrounded by an entourage. He was standing alone near a sculpture, examining it with a bored expression. Julian was currently pinned down by a B-list actress 3 tables away, unable to reach him. This was her chance. Not to help Julian, but to test herself. Crystal took a breath and walked straight up to the billionaire investor. The lighting does it a disservice, don't you think? Crystal said softly, standing beside him. Marcus Sterling didn't look at her immediately. He kept his eyes on the sculpture, a modernist bronze piece. I beg your pardon? The sculpture, Crystal gestured with her glass. It's a Giacometti. It's meant to evoke the fragility of the human condition, the isolation, but they've blasted it with warm uplighting. It makes it look cozy. It kills the tragedy. Sterling slowly turned his head. His steel grey eyes assessed her, travelling from her face to the hem of her gown and back up. His expression shifted from boredom to intrigue. You have a keen eye, Sterling said, his British accent crisp. Most people just see a thin bronze stick figure. I'm Marcus Sterling. I know. Crystal smiled, extending a hand. Crystal. She didn't say, Crystal Thorne. She wanted to be seen as herself first. Crystal, Sterling repeated, taking her hand. He held it a second longer than necessary, his thumb brushing the fabric of her sleeve. And this dress? Forgive me for being forward, but the construction is familiar. The shoulder structuring. Is this an EV? Crystal's heart skipped a beat. She sipped her champagne to hide her smile. You know fashion, Mr. Sterling. I know business, Sterling corrected, turning fully toward her. And I know art. Evie is the only designer in the last decade who understands that fashion is engineering. I've been trying to get a meeting with her, or him, for months. My private equity firm wants to acquire the brand, but the designer is a ghost. Maybe the designer prefers the work to speak for itself, Crystal suggested. Perhaps, Sterling chuckled. But in my experience, people hide for 2 reasons, fear or leverage. Which do you think it is? Maybe a 3rd reason, Crystal said, locking eyes with him. Maybe she's waiting for the right partner who understands that you can't mass-produce a soul. Sterling's eyebrows shot up. He looked at her with genuine respect. That is a profound insight. Are you in the industry, Crystal? Before she could answer, a hand clamped down on her shoulder. Heavy, possessive. There you are, Julian's voice boomed, fake joviality barely masking his fury. Mr. Sterling, I see you've met my wife. I hope she hasn't been boring you with domestic chatter. Julian stepped between them, effectively blocking Crystal from Sterling's view. Sophia appeared at Julian's flank, smiling tightly. Not at all, Sterling said, his tone cooling instantly. We were discussing art. Your wife has a remarkable perspective on Giacometti. Julian laughed, a dismissive barking sound. Art? Crystal? She barely knows the difference between a Picasso and a finger painting. You must be mistaken, Marcus. She spends her time gardening. Crystal felt the humiliation burn her cheeks, but she didn't look down. She looked at Sterling. Sterling didn't laugh. He stared at Julian with a look of distaste. Is that so? Absolutely, Julian continued, oblivious to the temperature drop. Anyway, Marcus, I'm glad I caught you. I wanted to discuss the Aurora project. I know you had some reservations about the battery longevity, but my team has run the numbers. Mr. Thorne, Sterling interrupted, raising a hand. I am currently enjoying a conversation with your wife. The Aurora project can wait until dinner. Julian blinked, stunned. My wife? Yes. Sterling stepped around Julian, offering his arm to Crystal. Crystal, the dinner bell is about to ring. I believe the seating chart has me at the head table. Would you do me the honor of sitting next to me? I want to hear more about your theory on leverage. Julian's mouth fell open. Sophia looked like she had swallowed a lemon. But, Julian stammered, the seating chart is fixed. Crystal is at table 14. Table 14 was by the kitchen. I'm the guest of honor, Mr. Thorne, Sterling said coldly. I sit where I want, and with whom I want. Come, Crystal. Crystal looked at Julian. For 3 years, she had waited for him to offer her his arm like that. He never had. She placed her hand on Marcus Sterling's arm. I would be delighted, Marcus. She walked away with the billionaire, leaving her husband and his mistress standing in the middle of the room, looking like fools. The dinner service was an extravagant affair held in the Temple of Dendur room. Long tables draped in white linen were set with gold cutlery and crystal glasses. At the head table, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Marcus Sterling sat at the head. To his right sat Crystal. To his left, a very agitated Julian Thorne. Sophia had managed to squeeze herself into a seat nearby, displacing a confused French diplomat. Throughout the first course, a delicate lobster bisque, Julian tried desperately to steer the conversation back to himself. The Q3 projections for Thorne Dynamics are up 15%, Julian said, leaning over his soup. We're outperforming Tesla in the solar sector, Marcus. If you invest now, your ROI will be triple within 2 years. Sterling buttered a roll, not looking at Julian. Numbers are easy to manipulate, Julian. Vision is harder to fake. I'm concerned about your company's leadership culture. Leadership, Julian bristled. I built this company from the ground up. And yet, Sterling said, turning to Crystal, you seem to overlook the assets right under your nose. Crystal was just telling me about the supply chain issues in the textile industry and how they mirror the bottlenecking in lithium mining. It was fascinating. Julian choked on his wine. Crystal was talking about lithium. He looked at his wife as if she had suddenly started speaking Mandarin. Crystal took a calm bite of her salad. It's simple logistics, Julian, she said, her voice smooth. Fashion relies on raw materials just like tech. When the silk yield in Guizhou dropped last year due to the drought, the market shifted to synthetic blends. Similarly, when the cobalt mines in Congo face political instability, your battery production halts. Diversification is the only safety net. The table went silent. Even Sophia stopped texting under the table. Julian stared at her. Where did you read that? Did you memorize a Wikipedia page before coming here? No, Julian, Crystal said. I read your reports, the ones you leave on the nightstand, the ones you say are too complicated for my pretty little head. Sophia let out a high-pitched, nervous laugh. Oh, isn't that cute? She's trying to play CEO. Julian, honey, maybe we should get Crystal a dessert wine. She seems a bit confused. Sterling set his knife down. The sound clattered against the china, silencing the immediate area. Miss Laurent, Sterling said, addressing Sophia without warmth. "I do not find intelligence cute. I find it essential. And frankly, Mrs. Thorne has shown more business acumen in 20 minutes than you or Julian have shown all evening." Julian's face turned purple. "Now look here, Sterling. You can't speak to my VP like that. And you certainly don't know my wife. She's a housewife. She has no career, no ambition. She's a dependent." "Is that so?" Sterling wiped his mouth with a napkin. He stood up. The room quieted down. When Marcus Sterling stood, people listened. He picked up a spoon and tapped his champagne glass. Ting, ting, ting. The chatter in the massive hall died down. 600 eyes turned to the head table. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling announced, his voice projecting without a microphone. "Thank you for welcoming me to New York. Tonight has been full of surprises." Julian smirked, straightening his jacket. He thought Sterling was about to announce the partnership with Thorne Dynamics. He reached for Sophia's hand under the table. "I came here tonight," Sterling continued, "looking for two things: the next great investment in energy and a ghost." The crowd murmured. For months, the fashion world has been hunting for the identity of the designer known as EV. Sterling said, "A designer who has anonymously revitalized 3 major European heritage brands in the last year alone. A designer whose work is currently projected to be worth over $100 million in intellectual property." Julian frowned. Why is he talking about clothes? "I told my board I wouldn't leave New York until I found EV, Sterling said. He looked down at Julian, a cruel smile playing on his lips. And imagine my surprise when I found her sitting at my dinner table, ignored by the very man who swore to cherish her. Julian froze. His blood ran cold. He looked at Crystal. Crystal remained seated, her posture regal. She didn't look at Julian. She looked at the crowd. "Mr. Thorne told me his wife was invisible," Sterling boomed. "He told me she had no talent. But the dress she is wearing tonight, the Midnight Architect design, is the signature piece of EV's unreleased collection." Sterling turned to Crystal and extended his hand. "Mrs. Thorne, or should I say, EV." The silence was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Crystal stood up. She looked at Julian, whose face was a mask of pure shock and horror. She looked at Sophia, whose mouth was hanging open. "Thank you, Marcus," Crystal said, her voice amplified by the acoustics of the room. "But please, just Crystal is fine. Evil was just a way to survive." The room erupted. Flashbulbs went off like a supernova. Reporters were shouting, "It's her! She's the designer! The billionaire's wife is the secret genius!" Julian sat there, paralyzed. His mind was racing. Evie? The designer everyone talks about? The one making millions? My wife? He realized with a sinking feeling in his gut that the woman he had called a burden was likely richer and certainly more respected than he was at this very moment. He stood up, scrambling to regain control. "Crystal! Crystal, honey! Why didn't you tell me? This is wonderful. We can—" Crystal turned to him. The cameras caught every second of it. "We?" she asked, her voice cutting through the applause. "There is no we in this, Julian. You wanted me invisible. You wanted a ghost. Well, ghosts don't have business partners." She turned back to Sterling. "Marcus, I believe you wanted to discuss an acquisition. I have my portfolio in the car. But I'm afraid my husband won't be joining us. He has a peaceful home to get back to." "Excellent," Sterling grinned. "My car is waiting." Crystal stepped away from the table, leaving Julian standing alone in the spotlight of his own humiliation. The crowd wasn't looking at him with envy anymore. They were looking at him with pity and mockery. As Crystal walked away, the midnight blue dress trailing behind her, Julian realized the night wasn't just a disaster. It was the beginning of the end. But the story wasn't over. Julian Thorne was a shark, and sharks bite when they bleed. The ride back to the penthouse for Julian and Sophia was a descent into hell. Julian didn't speak. He sat in the darkness of the limousine, staring at his phone, watching the stock price of Thorne Dynamics wobble in the aftermarket trading. The hashtags Rojo Crystal Thorne and Osto EVR revealed were trending worldwide, eclipsing the Thorne Dynamics launch completely. Sophia, sensing the shift in power, tried to salvage her position. Julian, it's just a PR stunt. She's bluffing. Even if she is this designer, she's still your wife. Under New York law, marital assets are shared. If her brand is worth millions, half of that is yours. Julian's eyes snapped up, a predatory glint returning to them. You're right. No prenup. He laughed, a cold, humorless sound. She thought she could humiliate me. She just handed me a golden parachute. If Sterling buys her brand, he's paying me. When they arrived at the penthouse, the place was already different. The lights were on, all of them. Julian stormed in, ready to dictate terms. Crystal, get out here. But Crystal wasn't cowering in the bedroom. She was in the living room, standing amidst a sea of cardboard boxes. She wasn't packing her clothes. She was packing books, documents, and the small personal items that made the house a home. She was wearing jeans and a simple white t-shirt, the midnight blue gown carefully hung in a garment bag near the door. She looked younger, lighter. You're back early, Crystal said calmly, taping a box shut. Did Sterling kick you out? Don't get cute with me, Julian snarled, kicking a box aside. You think you're clever? Walking out like that? Do you have any idea how much damage you caused my reputation tonight? I didn't damage your reputation, Julian. I just stopped propping it up, Crystal replied, picking up a stack of files. Sophia stepped forward, crossing her arms. You're making a mistake, Crystal. Julian is going to sue you for everything. Abandonment of the marriage, emotional distress, and half your little fashion empire, Julian added, stepping into her personal space. We're married, Elle. Everything you built in that closet, it's mine too. You want a divorce? Fine. But I'm taking 50% of EV, and I'm selling it to the lowest bidder just to spite you. Crystal stopped moving. She looked at Julian with a mixture of pity and amusement. I expected you to say that, she said softly. You always were predictable when it came to money. But you forgot one thing, Julian. What's that? I didn't start EV after we got married, she said, pulling a thick legal document from her bag. She tossed it onto the glass coffee table. I started it 6 months before the wedding. And this? This is the intellectual property deed. It's held in a blind trust in the Cayman Islands. Under my maiden name, you have no claim to it. Not a cent. Julian grabbed the document, his hand shaking as he scanned the legalese. It was watertight. You planned this, he whispered, looking at her with genuine fear for the first time. You knew? I didn't plan to leave you, Julian. Not at first, Crystal said, her voice trembling slightly. I kept the money separate because I wanted to surprise you. I wanted to use it to help you pay off the debt for Project Aurora. I was going to give it all to you on our anniversary next month. The silence in the room was deafening. Julian looked as if he had been punched in the gut. He had been chasing Marcus Sterling for funding, ignoring the wife who was sitting on a fortune she intended to gift him. But then, Crystal continued, her eyes hardening, you brought her into our home. She gestured to Sophia. You treated me like a servant. You told me I was invisible. So I decided to disappear. "Crystal, wait," Julian stammered, reaching for her hand. The reality of his loss was crashing down. It wasn't just the money. It was the realization that he had thrown away the only person who actually cared about him. "We can fix this. I can fire Sophia, right now. Sophia, get out!" Sophia gasped. "Excuse me?" "You heard him," Crystal said, picking up her bag. "But it doesn't matter. I'm not leaving because of Sophia. I'm leaving because of you, Julian. You're empty. And I'm done pouring myself into a black hole." She walked to the door, the doorman already waiting to take her boxes. "You walk out that door, Crystal, and I will destroy you," Julian screamed, his desperation turning back into rage. "I will bury you in lawsuits. I'll tell the press you're mentally unstable. You'll never sell another dress in this town." Crystal paused at the elevator. She turned back one last time. "Watch me," she said. The doors closed. The next 3 months were a bloodbath, played out on the front pages of the New York Post and the Wall Street Journal. Julian made good on his threat. He hired the most aggressive divorce attorneys in Manhattan. He couldn't touch the EV money directly, so he attacked her character. He leaked stories claiming Crystal was neglectful, that she had married him for his connections, that she was unstable. The crazy seamstress, "Billionaire claims wife, hallucinated career," read one headline. He sued her for corporate espionage, claiming she had stolen Thorne Dynamics trade secrets to fund her business, a baseless lie meant to freeze her assets while the courts investigated. For weeks, Crystal's bank accounts were frozen. She couldn't access her EV funds. She was living in a hotel room paid for by Marcus Sterling, who had become her mentor and business partner. "He's trying to bleed you dry," Sterling told her one afternoon in his office overlooking Central Park. "He knows he can't win the case, but he wants to bankrupt you with legal fees before you can launch your spring collection." Crystal looked at the prototypes of her new line. They were bold, aggressive, reds and blacks, sharp angles. It was war paint. "He wants a fight," Crystal said, staring at the fabric. "I'm going to give him a war." While Julian was fighting in the tabloids, Crystal fought in the boardroom. She knew Thorne Dynamics better than Julian thought. She knew that Project Aurora, his flagship renewable energy initiative, was failing. The batteries were overheating. The tech was flawed. Julian had been covering it up to keep the stock price high. Crystal didn't go to the press. She went to the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. She submitted an anonymous whistleblower report detailing the falsified safety data she had seen Julian hide in his home safe. 2 days before Crystal's debut fashion show at New York Fashion Week, the news broke. FBI raids Thorne Dynamics, CEO Julian Thorne under investigation for fraud. The stock plummeted. Thorne Dynamics lost 40% of its value in 6 hours. Julian was in his office when the agents walked in. He watched his empire crumbling on the TV screens. Sophia had already resigned that morning, seeing the ship sinking. She had even given a quote to TMZ calling Julian a tyrant. But Julian wasn't done. He was cornered, and that made him dangerous. He bailed himself out within hours and made one final desperate move. He knew Crystal's fashion show was taking place at the Brooklyn Navy Yard that night. He knew Marcus Sterling had invited the top investors from around the world. If Julian could crash that event, cause a scene, and claim that Crystal was the one who falsified the data to frame him, he might, just might, create enough confusion to save his skin. He grabbed his coat and headed for the Navy Yard. He wasn't going as a CEO. He was going as a husband scorned. The Dougal greenhouse at the Brooklyn Navy Yard was vibrating. It wasn't just the bass from the sound system, which thumped against the chest like a second heartbeat. It was the sheer, electric anticipation hanging in the air. This wasn't just a fashion show. It was a coronation. Inside the massive industrial space, The elite of the world had gathered. The lighting was dim, bathed in deep, bruised purples and violently bright whites. The runway was a jagged strip of black glass that looked like an oil slick cutting through the room. In the front row, Marcus Sterling sat next to the editor-in-chief of Vogue, his face a mask of proud anticipation. Behind them, a sea of A-list celebrities, tech investors, and hungry influencers held their phones aloft, ready to live-stream the debut of EV's Resurrection collection to millions. Backstage, the atmosphere was controlled chaos. Crystal Vance stood in front of a floor-to-length mirror. She wasn't wearing the midnight blue gown tonight. She was wearing a tuxedo, sharp, severe, and entirely white. It was a suit of armor. Her hair was slicked back, her face devoid of the soft, apologetic makeup she used to wear for Julian. She looked like a blade. 5 minutes to curtain, Ms. Vance, the stage manager whispered, tapping his headset. Is everything in position? Crystal asked, her voice steady. Everything. The lighting cues, the sound mix, and security at the south entrance has been relaxed, just as you ordered. Crystal nodded. She looked at her reflection one last time. She didn't see the heartbroken wife anymore. She saw the executioner. Let him in, she whispered. Outside, the wind off the East River was biting, but Julian Thorne didn't feel the cold. He was burning up. Sweat matted his expensive dress shirt to his back. His tie was gone. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, flapping uselessly in the wind. He looked nothing like the titan of tech who graced the cover of Forbes. He looked like a man hunted. For the last 48 hours, Julian had been living a nightmare. The FBI raid had been swift and brutal. They had seized his servers, his laptops, and his passport. The freezing of his personal assets meant he couldn't even pay his driver. He had taken a cab to Brooklyn and stiffed the driver, running the last 2 blocks on foot. He was fueled by a singular, manic delusion. Crystal was behind this, but she was weak. She had always been weak. If he could just get to her, if he could just get in front of the cameras and scream his truth that she was a corporate spy, a saboteur, a liar, he could flip the narrative. He could create enough confusion to stall the stock plummet. He was Julian Thorne. He could talk his way out of anything. He reached the south entrance. He expected a wall of security. He expected to have to fight. Instead, the heavy metal door was unguarded. It was slightly ajar. Julian didn't question it. His narcissism wouldn't let him. They're afraid of me, he thought. They know I still own this city. He shoved the door open and stumbled into the backstage darkness. The noise was deafening here. Models towering and alien in their beauty rushed past him in clouds of hairspray and tulle. They wore garments that looked like debris, shredded silk, burned velvet, metal corsets that looked like car wrecks. It was aggressive. It was terrifying. "Crystal!" Julian screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the industrial techno pounding from the speakers. He pushed a rack of clothes aside, sending hangers clattering to the concrete floor. He saw her. She was standing near the curtain that separated the backstage area from the runway. She was bathed in a pool of white light, checking a clipboard. She looked so calm, so untouchable. The sight of her broke something inside him. "You!" Julian roared, lunging forward. He grabbed her shoulder, spinning her around. Crystal didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She just looked at him, her dark eyes flat and bored. "You're late, Julian," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "I expected you 10 minutes ago." "You set me up," Julian spat, his face inches from hers. He smelled of scotch and fear. "You gave those files to the SEA. You leaked the battery data. You destroyed my life." "I didn't leak anything, Julian," Crystal replied, brushing his hand off her shoulder as if it were a speck of dust. I submitted a formal report regarding safety violations. You decided to cut corners on the cooling systems to save 12 cents per unit. You decided to put explosive batteries in family cars. I didn't destroy your life. I saved the people who would have bought them. I am Thorn Dynamics, Julian screamed, his veins bulging in his neck. I am the visionary. You're nothing. You're a seamstress playing dress-up with my money. I'm going to go out there. He pointed a shaking finger toward the curtain. And I'm going to tell the world who you really are. A fraud. A thief. Crystal smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. You want to go out there? She tilted her head. You want to address the audience? I'm going to ruin you, Julian hissed. Okay, Crystal said. She reached into a pocket and pulled out a wireless microphone. She clicked it on. Go ahead. She shoved the microphone into his chest. Julian blinked, confused by her compliance. He grabbed the mic. This was it. His moment. He would charm them. He would destroy her. Watch me, he sneered. He turned toward the heavy velvet curtain, but he didn't have to walk through it. Crystal raised her hand and snapped her fingers. Click. High above them, massive hydraulic winches engaged. The entire back wall, the heavy black velvet curtain that separated the backstage chaos from the polished runway, didn't just part. It rose. In 2 seconds, the barrier between Julian and the world vanished. The light was blinding. Julian shielded his eyes, stumbling back. When his vision cleared, his blood turned to ice. He wasn't backstage anymore. The backstage area was actually the top of the runway. The stage design was open concept. He was standing on a raised platform, illuminated by 12 spotlights, and in front of him, 3,000 people. The entire audience was staring right at him. The silence was instantaneous. The music cut out. Julian stood there, disheveled, sweating, his shirt unbuttoned, holding a microphone, looking like a maniac. He looked at the front row. He saw Marcus Sterling. He saw the press. He saw the red lights of the cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, Crystal's voice boomed over the main PA system. She wasn't holding a mic. She was wearing a headset. She stepped out from the shadows, standing next to Julian, pristine in her white tuxedo. Welcome to the Liberation, Crystal announced, her voice echoing through the massive hall. Art is often an imitation of life. But tonight, we wanted to show you the raw reality of it. She gestured to Julian as if he were a mannequin. We talk about empowerment in fashion, Crystal continued, walking a slow circle around her frozen, terrified husband. But we rarely talk about what we have to overcome to get there. We don't talk about the weight we carry, the voices that tell us to be small, to be quiet, to be invisible. She stopped in front of Julian. This is Julian Thorn, she said. The name landed like a curse. Once a billionaire, once a husband, now a lesson. Julian's mind was racing. Speak, he told himself. Defend yourself. He raised the microphone to his trembling lips. She's lying, he croaked. The sound feedbacked, a high-pitched squeal that made the audience wince. She stole my company. She's a fraud. Nobody gasped. Nobody looked shocked. Instead, a ripple of applause started in the back. Then it grew. People were nodding. They thought this was a performance. They thought Julian was an actor, hired to play the role of the desperate, patriarchal villain crumbling before the powerful woman. Bravo! Someone shouted from the second row. No! Julian screamed, panic setting in. I'm not acting. I'm Julian Thorn. Listen to me. They are listening, Julian, Crystal said softly, leaning in close so only he could hear. They're listening to a man who has lost everything because he was too arrogant to see the cliff he was driving off. Crystal turned to the DJ booth high above. She nodded. The music kicked back in. Not techno this time, but a soaring, operatic aria. "And now," Crystal shouted, "the finale." She pointed to the far end of the runway. The main doors of the greenhouse opened. Blue and red lights flashed against the night sky. 4 figures walked onto the runway. They weren't models. They were wearing windbreakers with 3 letters emblazoned on the back in yellow. FBI. The audience went wild. They stood up, cheering. They thought it was the most realistic, avant-garde fashion statement of the decade. The commentary on white-collar crime. The realism. Genius. Julian saw the agents marching toward him down the long, black glass runway. "No," he whimpered. He dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. He turned to run, but Crystal blocked his path. "Don't run, Julian," she said. "It ruins the composition." The agents reached the platform. They didn't smile. They didn't wave to the crowd. They walked straight up to Julian Thorne. "Julian Thorne," the lead agent said, his voice carrying without a mic. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud." Rough hands grabbed Julian's arms. He tried to pull away, his dignity shattering completely. "Get off me! Do you know who I am?" Julian shrieked as the handcuffs clicked. The metallic sound was crisp. "Yes," Crystal said, stepping back to let the photographers get the shot. "You're the man who used to own this town." The agents spun him around. As they marched him down the runway, the walk of shame televised to the entire world, Julian looked into the crowd. He saw the faces of men he had done business with, women he had flirted with. They were all clapping. They were filming him. He looked back one last time at the top of the stage. Crystal stood there, alone, bathed in the white spotlight. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking up, her arms raised to accept the ovation. She looked like a phoenix rising from the ashes of his life. As he was shoved into the back of a squad car outside, the last thing Julian heard was the roar of the crowd chanting her name. "Evie! Evie! Evie!" 6 months later, the office was quiet. It was the penthouse suite of the building formerly known as Thorne Tower. The sign out front had been changed 3 weeks ago. It now read, Vance Global. Crystal sat behind the massive oak desk that used to be Julian's. The room had been remodeled. The cold, sterile steel and glass were gone, replaced by warm woods, soft velvets, and art that actually meant something. She signed the final page of a thick stack of documents and capped her pen. "It's done?" Marcus Sterling asked. He was sitting on the sofa, sipping an espresso. "It's done," Crystal said, sliding the folder across the desk. "The acquisition is finalized. I officially own 100% of Thorne Dynamics assets, patents, and real estate." "And the liabilities?" "Liquidated," Crystal said. "We sold off the bad battery tech to a recycling firm. We're pivoting the entire infrastructure to the new sustainable textile weaves I developed. We're turning his battery factories into loom mills." Marcus smiled. Poetic justice, turning a toxic empire into something that creates beauty. "It's not just beauty, Marcus. It's structure. It's strength," Crystal corrected. She stood up and walked to the window. The view of Manhattan was breathtaking. It was the same view Julian had looked at every day, but he had never really seen it. He had only seen what he could take from it. "Have you heard from him?" Marcus asked quietly. Crystal didn't turn around. "His lawyer called yesterday. Julian is trying to cut a deal. He offered to give up his offshore accounts if I wrote a letter of leniency to the judge." "And?" "I told the lawyer that I don't write fiction," Crystal said. She touched the glass of the window. Somewhere, in a federal holding facility in upstate New York, Julian was sitting in a grey cell, wearing a grey jumpsuit. The irony wasn't lost on her. He had forced her to wear grey for 3 years to make her invisible. Now, grey was the only colour he would see for the next 15 years. She turned back to the room, to her company, to her life. He ignored me when I was standing right beside him, Crystal said, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. I think it's only fair that I ignore him now. She picked up a sketch pad. She had a new collection to design. She was thinking of calling it The Matriarch. "Ready for the board meeting, Miss Vance?" Marcus asked, standing up. Crystal Vance, the invisible wife who became the billionaire queen, straightened her blazer. "I've never been more ready," she said. She walked out of the office, leaving the ghost of Julian Thorne behind in the dark, where he belonged. Talk about a power move, from being forced to wear drab grey clothes to owning the entire skyscraper. Crystal Vance just gave a masterclass in revenge. Julian Thorne thought his wife was a background character, but he forgot that the person in the background sees everything. It really makes you wonder, how many people are being underestimated right now, just waiting for their moment to take over the runway? What do you guys think? Was Crystal's performance art trap too cruel? Or did Julian get exactly what he deserved for his arrogance? I want to hear your theories. If you were Crystal, would you have visited him in prison to gloat, or was ignoring him the ultimate punishment? Let me know in the comments below. If you loved this story of justice and high-fashion drama, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And subscribe for more twisted tales of the rich and famous. Don't forget to ring the bell so you're the first to see next week's story. Thanks for watching, and remember, the quietest person in the room is usually the one you should be most afraid of.